Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, Dynasty League, PPR League, IDP League, even Daily Fantasy Football League. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. On the GSMC Podcast Network, it is your boy, it is your man, it is your family member from the other side of the fantasy fraternity. That's right. It's your boy. It's Ethan. Here, Friday Fantasy Talking once again. We're getting it in, and we're getting it in right. Doing all the right things here at the GSMC, and we got a lot to talk about today. We are 5 weeks in, going into week 6. That makes sense, right? That is correct. We have played 5 weeks of football. We played 5 weeks of fantasy football, and we're heading into week 6, so that means we have to discuss matchups around the league, and there's just so many new, refreshing things that are happening, right? So, and we talked about the NFC East on Tuesday, and a little bit on the GSMC Football Podcast me and Bryce did about just what's going on with the NFC East or the NFC Least, whichever one you want to call it. It is a little bit open. And although the Dallas Cowboys do take a crushing loss with Dak Prescott, it's still very winnable. In fact, they are on top of the division. Alas, at what cost, though? Who knows? We'll find out. We'll talk about some Russell Wilson as well. So we're going to get into some Mike Davis stuff because that's pretty impactful. I've had some conversations about what exactly is the game plan if you own Mike Davis and you don't also own Christian McCaffrey. LeVeon Bell news, which is big time. We might start off with that. And then, of course, COVID-related things as things are starting to shake up in and out of the league almost daily. So let's start off with LeVeon Bell. LeVeon Bell got released on Tuesday. So when you heard GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast and the Football Podcast on Tuesday, we did not know that LeVeon Bell was going to get released. But to be honest, LeVeon Bell has been in talks and trade discussions since the offseason. Like, it looked like they were trying to get off that contract for a while, and they could not get anything worth of value for a trade for LeVeon, so they decided to cut him. I believe he has a few teams listed as who he's looking at. One of the said teams is, in fact, the Kansas City Chiefs. So he plans on either to sign with the Dolphins, the Chiefs, or the Buffalo Bills. So it wouldn't surprise me exactly where he's going to go. So I got to tell you, here's the one. I think at this point, I have to assume that for fantasy purposes, we all want him to go to the Dolphins, right? You would think the Dolphins just because he'd get more touches potentially, but hear me out. If we had Le'Veon Bell on roster expecting him
to get around, 30 touches or something like that at the beginning of the season, and that's why you took him probably 4th round or something like that, expecting to get some upside value. Well, I don't know if that's coming anyway. So why would you expect him going to the Dolphins would be better for you than going somewhere like the Chiefs? That offensive explosions can be really, really strong. And the Bills would have showcased that they have a really good passing game in their own right. And typically both of them are vertical down the field throwers as teams. But at the same time, I think that they get their running backs involved quite well in the passing game, as Devin Singletary is already a good pass catcher out of the backfield. And so is Clyde Edwards-Helaire, even though Clyde Edwards-Helaire is still kind of getting his rookie bearings into fruition. And this is what I was talking about earlier, way earlier in the season, when we were talking about Clyde Edwards as a top 7 pick in the draft just because he's the pedigree of running backs that come into that Andy Reid system. And unfortunately, it hasn't panned out to that level of upside, and he's underperformed due to where he was drafted, of course. And that was kind of reasonably seen. You could have seen that coming. I feel like if you knew what you're doing, you should have seen that coming. And I think that pairing him up with someone like LeVeon Bell would be good for both sides. And we've seen already, if a team wants to have 2 running backs and commit to them in that game, we can see it happening. We saw it with the Browns this year. Now, granted, the Browns are a run-first team, and that's fine. I don't necessarily believe that LeVeon Bell's true destiny in the league right now is to be a run-first guy anyway, in a run-first tote-the-rock system. I think that he is one of those guys who's going to have a supplemental running back next to him to be successful, and they're going to use him more for his ability to be able to catch the ball out the backfield rather than just to be a downhill runner. As we know, Le'Veon's running style is one of the more unique running styles that we've seen in the league. It's very patient. He waits for his blockers. He gets behind his blockers. He hides behind them and finds the seam. And then he goes and he takes off. And it was really tough on the Jets to do something like that when the Jets' offensive line was not the strongest. The Jets' personnel grouping was not the strongest. There was a lot going on with that, to the point to where, you know, it just became a detriment. He really was hurt during his averages, during the 2 seasons, or 1.5 seasons, I should say, that he played there. It just really wasn't great. So, of course, the interest in Miami is probably something big because that's where he was in the offseason. And it would certainly be a welcome addition to the backfield, as they currently have Myles Gaskin. So if you have Myles Gaskin, I know you're not feeling good right now. You're not feeling good about this. He rushed for 249 yards while receiving 23 passes for 147 yards. You know, Matt Breida is second on the team with 100 rushing yards on 27 carries. Jordan Howard is just 14 yards on 18 carries through 4 games. He does have the team high 3 rushing touchdowns for the Dolphins, although, and they are 2-3. So it's not like the Dolphins are particularly in a super bad losing situation. And we all know Buffalo is 1-4, and they sit in the first place spot of the AFC East. And they're 28th in the league in rushing through 5 games and 19th in yards per carry average. So Devin Singletary, it leads the Buffalo Bills with a 238 rushing yards, and second on the team in rushing yards is Josh Allen. So literally not a lot of rushing attacks. So rookie Zach Moss and TJ Yeldon have combined for 118 on 27 carries. So another tidbit is that that LeVeon, if he signed with the Jets or he signed with one of these 3 teams, he would get to face New York, the Jets. So New York Jets are 0-5 thus far, of course, and they will play Miami, Buffalo, and Kansas City over the next 3 weeks. So the revenge game is also going to be in full-on effect there. Just a tidbit, you know, just information, just something to hold on. If you have LeVeon, he has value, right? LeVeon's value was tanking to astronomical levels through the first 5 weeks of the season until Tuesday afternoon when we found out that LeVeon was about to go. So here we are. Wait, was LeVeon Tuesday? Let me recheck. I guess he was released earlier in the week. We didn't discuss it in the podcast because it didn't happen yet. So I'm assuming that it's Tuesday, but something about it. This Tuesday night game is throwing me because I knew it happened while I was talking with someone while a game was about to come on. I think it was the Tuesday night game, which is weird to say. But if you have LeVeon, if you're looking to upgrade your team, and it's not a running back, you probably should just, you can lose him and potentially get some decent player back. But at the same time, if you need running backs, you might as well just keep him, because whatever he did in the Jets, whatever he's going to go to, they're going to utilize him way better than the Jets. Like, we've seen what rock bottom LeVeon looks like already, which is absolutely nothing. It's impossible to me to think that LeVeon goes somewhere else and just does absolutely nothing again. So, law of averages here. It's just probably better just to keep LeVeon Bell and to just hold him. Like, honestly, it was probably safe to he was a stash player with high upside, because it was so heavily reported that the Jets were looking to part ways from him way early on in the season. So this was probably just the long game finally coming to fruition here. And just real quick about the Jets. I don't know what the Jets do for the immediate future. Of course, I don't believe Adam Gates will be coming back no matter what, either if it's in the middle of this season, which doesn't seem to be the case because it would have happened by now, or it's going to be at the end of the season. He's going to be let go at some point, and maybe even the general manager, the GM, would probably be let go as well. If they end up with the worst record in the league, do they take Trevor Lawrence? What does Trevor Lawrence do for you, per se, right? And here's the thing. Everybody's going to say, well, if that was the case, why did the Bengals take Joe Burrow? Joe Burrow looks really good. Yeah, but the Bengals aren't also winning big games, right? They're not doing anything that necessarily they couldn't have done with Andy Dalton, per se, right? Joe Burrow is young. He's built for the future. They'll have their quarterback for the foreseeable 10, 15 years. That holds value. And if that's what the Jets want to do, and Trevor Lawrence pans out to be that guy, awesome. That's great. But the thing about having franchise-defined quarterbacks is that if you have nothing built around them, they will presumably be nothing for the most part. It's my biggest worry with players like Deshaun Watson. And it was a worry for Lamar for a little while until the Ravens changed up their whole approach, and they've made their offense tailor-made to fit Lamar, and their defense is fantastic. Their win now mode is right now, because eventually when people have to start getting paid for real, then their Super Bowl chance windows start to come to a little bit of a close, because the first things that go are defense. First players that go, because they'll go sign somewhere else that will pay them. And, it's the offensive league for the most part. So that's just kind of where it's at. You're seeing it with the New Orleans Saints right now. Drew Brees is taking basically team-friendly deals, but at the same time, they still have very little. They cap magicians, they are, but they have to maneuver the cap so specific in order to keep the team that they have, and it's very hard to sign everybody. Thankfully, the Jets have nothing, so they don't have to worry about signing anything so far. But at the same time, because they have nothing, what do you expect the Jets to do with Trevor Lawrence that they can't already do with Sam Darnold? The punch-drunk scenario just sounds like it's going to repeat itself. Trevor Lawrence is not going to have a good offensive line. Check. Why? Because Justin Herbert doesn't have the best offensive line right now. Some are hurt. I understand that. Joe Burrow does not have an offensive line. Dwayne Haskins didn't have an offensive line. Neither does Kyle Allen. Neither does Alex Smith. No offensive line help whatsoever in those young situations. When you automatically see that, it's just a recipe for disaster. When you can't protect your quarterback, and Sam Darnold isn't old. He's very young. He's only been in the league 3 years. So we have to automatically assume that if they get the number one pick, they're going to have to go get Trevor Lawrence? No. Let's keep in mind, people draft offensive linemen in the first pick, second pick all the time. And I understand that the idea of passing up on Trevor Lawrence and he ends up being good might be seen as sacrilege. Sure. There's two other quarterbacks also there too that you might say, oh, well, you can't pass on that guy. They don't come that often. Well, that's correct. They don't come that often. But you already have a guy who honestly has shown some things that I like personally. I think Sam Darnold might be a good quarterback. He's just been really, really conditioned by bad Jets culture. He's been conditioned to not look down the field because he has no time. He's been conditioned to look to run first because the offensive line is just going to keep letting the ends free, and he has to make something happen with his legs. He's got to do hero ball stuff, the Carson Wentz stuff coming in there too. Same thing. Hero ball because they have no offensive line help. They have to make a lot of plays that they shouldn't have to make, and thus they create bad tendencies for themselves. They take too many hits, and thus their careers end up going a different direction because of the infrastructure of terrible franchises. And that is why I wouldn't want to see Trevor Lawrence go, because I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be really good. But the Jets haven't shown anything over the past 10 years that would prove otherwise, that they would do nothing but waste Trevor Lawrence's talent. And the better thing to do is try to stick it with Sam Darnold and build around him, because taking somebody like that early with foreseeably no future in sight for the Jets seems just bad. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back talking about some more Week 5 shenanigans and talking about Week 6, GSMC. Before we get back to the fantasy news, I got to ask, man, how are you guys on and on all the time? Always on go, always on the go. When life is go, 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 that's when you should reach for a Coors Light. It's made to chill. Coors Light wants you to know that no matter what sport is on this fall, Saturdays are your time to chill. Sundays are your time to chill. Even if your team isn't playing this year, there are plenty of teams and sports on TV that can give you an excuse to chill and drink a beer. Coors Light is awesome, man. I love Coors Light. It gives me the nice refreshment that I need, and it just keeps you going right, man. Mountain cold refreshment made to chill. Coors Light is cold lager, cold filtered, cold packaged, and is literally made for you to chill, man. So relax. Coors Light is the beer that I end up choosing when I choose to unwind, when I need to unwind. So when you need to reset, a recharge, please choose Coors Light. Reach for the one that's made to chill. Get Coors Light and its new look delivered straight to your door at get.coorslight.com. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewer Company, Golden, Colorado.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, we're back, and we're going to continue on this topic of conversation, which is fantasy football. We're still talking running backs, man. We're going to talk about ones that are potential to come back in Week 6, but honestly, I think that it's safe to say that he is not, but we're going to talk about the future, potentially Week 7, Week 8. So Christian McCaffrey should be coming off of IR this week. For Week 6, he's going to be testing out that high ankle sprain, and he will go under the test to see if he can be available to play, but it's pretty wise to assume that he's going to sit this one out. So if you have Mike Davis, which is the clear-cut reason why you care about this, is if you have Mike Davis and you don't have Christian McCaffrey, should I say. So if you have Mike Davis, you still are safe for at least one more week. But let's look at Mike Davis's statistics here. So he right now is averaging some pretty crazy stuff. He's 7th in position ranking. He has 90 fantasy points. He averages 18 in a game, and he had 29.9 last game, which was probably the slice of cake that finished off all of this stuff to begin with. So Week 5, 29.9, Week 4, 22.1, Week 3, 23.1, and Week to 15.5. So he hasn't gotten more than 16 rushing attempts, but he have gotten at least 5 over the last 4 games in receptions, and he's really have gotten 8 or more in the last 3 or 4 games combined, and he gets a lot of receiving yards as well. So he hasn't been scoring, but the volume has been nice. Now the volume is going to drop, especially when they go up against New Orleans, as I believe that's when Christian McCaffrey is probably going to be seeing the field more likely than not. I think that his value should still hold true. Like, is he going to get you 22 points a game? Probably not. But can he do what he did against Tampa Bay in week 2? Probably. I think that I don't believe any team with any sense who has Christian McCaffrey, as in the Carolina Panthers, I don't believe the Carolina Panthers are going to look here and be like, yeah, we're just going to give Christian McCaffrey we're going to give him 70% of the snap count in week 1. That's just not going to happen. Maybe in week 10, maybe that will happen, but there's just no way. High ankle sprains are really serious business. And yeah, they're going to take their time. They're going to be careful with him because his game predicates on being able to use the ankle. And they're going to take, like we're seeing Michael Thomas right now having rods prod into his foot as part of treatment for this ankle sprain. Like, this is legit stuff. Like, this is not a game. So Mike Davis is going to hold value. It's just depending on what you think his value will be. He's not going to be the 7th ranked fantasy running back, right? That's not going to happen. But he could still be top 30. And that means he could be a decent running back too. And I see very much so a Panthers team that can go start running by committee and still have similar looks into their offense. They don't have to change much, right? They don't have to. Like, we've already seen what Mike Davis is capable of having a workload that he's had. That gives coaches a really solid, sample size of what they have in his play, like in that player. And I just don't think they're going to basically remove him from an offense that he was cooking in. He's still going to get touches, primarily probably in the passing game. Christian McCaffrey is probably going to get more work in carries and just rushing yardage in general, especially depending on the matchup, right? So, yeah, we understand Christian McCaffrey is a beast on the receiving end and on the rushing end. But let's keep in mind that was due to necessity. People didn't think that Carolina had weapons. Carolina has weapons across the field now. It's not just going to be the Christian McCaffrey show. The regression was going to happen regardless. What I will say is that the injury regression is going to happen, but he was going to regress regardless because that's just how things are. Christian McCaffrey was not going to maintain the pace that he was. Now, granted, we look at Aaron Jones and he outlier once again. I don't know how. And probably Alvin Kamara too, because last year clearly he was injured, and that was the reason why he was not maintaining the pace that he's currently on right now, like he did in year 1 and year 2. So maybe Christian McCaffrey does become another one of those outliers. But to be completely honest, I don't see the Panthers utilizing Christian McCaffrey in such a way that, one, might compromise his health later on in his career, and 2, when you have a back that has been showing signs of real skill, he can go out there and do the job. Why take him away from that? All you're doing is hurting his chances later on down the line. So, in reality, I just think that the Panthers roll both of them out and they'll just start feeding hands. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's going to be some Cleveland Browns, Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb sort of situation. But what I am saying, that you could see a little bit of how the Rams do it, right? In the Rams situation for fantasy wise, it's a little frustrating. I have Darrell Henderson Jr. I've seen reports that this might be the time to really get into the Cam Akers hype train. Who really knows, right? I don't know. Honestly, I might just wait till game day and choose which one I want in there. because as of right now, Jalen Henderson got taken out of the game at some point, and the game was basically kind of just done. So he was on the sideline for majority, but he did come back in the game. Don't know why that happened, but we saw Cam Akers get 60 yards on a couple touches, and he looks to be the guy that might be the future back for them in general. So I know two of them are going to get more looks than the other, and I think Mike Brown is still the third in the pecking order in that offense as far as running backs are concerned. So I have both just in case one of them decides to start tailing off and the other one starts to come up. I drafted Cam Akers. I picked up Darrell Henderson Jr. off waivers. You got to make some things work for yourself. But I do think Mike Davis is going to get some decent return. And I wouldn't be surprised if he can find himself getting 14 points a game. I just don't see how he regresses to the point of not being able to be put in somebody's lineup, somebody's flex spot. It's possible, right? If we look at Latavius Murray, right? Latavius Murray as a player, he's the 35th ranked fantasy running back. He has had over the past 2 games at least 7 points, and he gets usually around 12 touches a game. So he had 15 touches in Tampa Bay or against Tampa Bay, 48 yards. He had 3 touches against the Las Vegas Raiders. The Saints since week 3 have been focusing on running the ball really hard. So against Green Bay, he had 12 rushing attempts for 58 yards. He averages about 4.5 or about 4.2 yards per carry, which is pretty solid. He doesn't catch the ball much. That's Kamara's territory for sure. In Detroit, he had 14 rushes, 64 yards, and he also had 2 rushing touchdowns. So, yeah, you may be a little touchdown dependent, but when you're getting at least 12 carries a game, basically he had 8 against the Los Angeles Chargers, where in reality he kind of got game script out of the game for a majority of it until the Saints somehow came back in the fourth, right? Latavius Murray is a decent guy to put in, especially in a season where running backs were falling off like flies. And, it's always next man up mentality in this league. It's kind of always been that way. And we're seeing more so than ever that this sort of style of approach of running is very effective. Running backs, like I said earlier in the weeks doing this podcast, the drop off for quality running backs in the league is not very far. It's not a large drop-off between Latavius Murray and Mike Davis. Running backs come in boatloads to the NFL ready to take somebody's job. So you have to be on your A game at all times. Running backs don't get leeway. Somebody is willing to replace you right now. James Robinson was not drafted. James Robinson was 5th on the depth chart. Some people got injured. Some people were traded. Some people didn't show up in camp to win the job. And James Robinson ended up getting the job. That's just how the reality of the situation is. If you work hard, you show enough game, they will look at you, especially if it's not favoritism. And I think coaches are loyal to players that play hard. They will put in a player that plays hard and has, also produced. This isn't about playing hard versus actually producing here. He plays hard. He produces as well. He's coachable. Matt Rule seems to like him a lot. And I think that's the bottom line of the situation. If you can work with Matt Rule, you can work with him. And that's just kind of where that's at. And that's how I see it. So I wouldn't be too worried. If you want to trade off of him for another running back, maybe LeVeon. This might be the LeVeon trade waiting to happen. You trade Mike Davis for LeVeon. Now, granted, Mike Davis has one more solid game left in him before that trade probably needs to occur. But if you saw some foresight, somehow you got off a trade for LeVeon and maybe Mike Davis was involved, then kudos to you. But that might be one that you're willing to make now because Le'Veon's going to be sharing carries no matter where he goes. Mike Davis is going to be sharing carries when Christian McCaffrey comes back. And you either are trading Le'Veon for the potential upside of him getting more carries than Mike Davis, or you're just rolling with Mike Davis. So I would probably do something like that, or maybe look into getting like DeAndre Swift, who seems to be turning it on a bit more, and it seems to be more prominent in the offense. It's really hard for me to believe that the Lions are going to continue to utilize AP to this caliber week in and week out. You know, his body will have to tap out at some point, right? He's going to have to slow down at some point, right? I know his nickname is All Day, right? AP All Day. But at the same time, it's just like, this dude's old, man. That's what it is. They have these two guys that they drafted in the last 3 years that are supposedly supposed to be studs. Now, we know Kerryon has a bit of an injury thing going on, but come on. Like, this can't continue on, right? That's just the bottom line that I feel like. This can't obviously continue on, personally. So I think that you should just hold on to Mike Davis, have some patience, have some faith, and just see what happens. Now, of course, if the numbers just drop completely off a cliff in 2 weeks, then maybe you're just out of luck and maybe you should have dealt him off. But I don't think that they're just going to work him out of the offense just like that, especially when it's a high ankle sprain. This isn't an illness. This isn't like something that they can work through. Like, when running backs get hurt, typically their season will showcase that they were hurt for majority of the year. That's just typically how it is. A lot of running backs, especially that position, who have that type of workload, do not showcase a level of health that will not look like a hindrance to them. And they will be back next year a bit healthy, but that's just kind of how it is. Right? That's just kind of how it is. So just to reiterate, Mike Davis should be okay. What he's been doing is a product of having all of the running back touches that he possibly could receive. But that does not mean he's just going to fall out of nowhere when Christian McCaffrey does return. So I would not panic. If there's a trade to make a smart one. But I would not sit here and get off of Mike Davis just because he isn't going to be my running back one anymore. Because if you're looking to do that, then essentially you were down bad anyway, right? You probably didn't have Christian McCaffrey. So at this point, just hold out and, just hope for the best for Christian McCaffrey's health. But if you have Mike Davis, if you feel like this is the time to move, move him. Don't be afraid to make a trade. We're going to take another break, and we're going to continue on fantasy football conversations here, GSMC Fridays, man. We'll be right back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, we're back here, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm not really breaking no news, but I guess I'm technically breaking news on the podcast. The Atlanta Falcons shut down their facility, of course, Thursday morning after a member of the organization tested positive for COVID-19. The Falcons, citing an abundance of caution, announced that their operations Thursday would be conducted virtually. The league official told ESPN's Adam Schefter that the positive test was for a Falcons personnel official, not a player, and that the decision was made in consultation with the NFL and medical officials. And the Falcons said in the statement that the health and safety of our team is the highest priority. Sources told Adam Schefter earlier Thursday that the Falcons had multiple positive tests for the coronavirus. One source told Schefter that there were 4 positive tests, but a Falcons official said the team is not at 4 confirmed. And the official told Schefter that the Falcons are still working through details. Falcons placed Marlon Davidson on the reserve COVID list Tuesday after, according to sources, the rookie defensive lineman tested positive for the coronavirus. The 0-5 Falcons and interim head coach Raheem Morris are scheduled to play Minnesota in Minneapolis on Sunday, and there was no change regarding the status of the game as of Thursday morning. According to Adam Schefter, and Morris took over, of course, after the Dan Quinn firing. Davidson, a second-round pick out of Auburn, played 12 defensive snaps and 5 snaps on special teams in his team's 23-16 loss against Carolina. And he was the second Falcon player to test positive since the beginning of the regular season. And the first-round pick, AJ Terrell, tested positive the Saturday before the Falcons game. And Terrell, who missed 2 games before being activated October 8th, was the first player to miss a game because of COVID-19. So the Falcons announced Wednesday night that they had entered the NFL's intensive protocol. So this is the biggest update here. Another quick update, just to bring it out. You know what I'm saying? So wide receiver AJ Green said he is frustrated with the season but wants to remain in Cincinnati. So Green met with reporters on Thursday for the first time after TV cameras during last Sunday's loss to the Ravens appeared to catch Green telling a staffer that he should be traded if the team couldn't use him effectively. Green denied the characterization but expressed his frustration with the season during his news conference ahead of this weekend's game against the Colts. Green also said he wants to be with the Bengals through the upcoming trade deadline on November 3rd. And he says, I think we're building something special here, and I just want to be a part of the team that helps us win. Green left Sunday's game as he suffered a hamstring injury. The 7-time Pro Bowler said the hamstring feels better after treatment earlier this week, and he's slated to play against Indianapolis. Green missed the entire 2019 season with an ankle injury, and he and the team failed to reach an agreement on a long-term deal this offseason, and Green was given a 1-year franchise tag worth $18 million. 18.2, should I say. His production is down significantly in 5 games this season. In his first year playing with coach Zach Taylor's system with rookie quarterback Joe Burrow behind center, Green has caught only 14 of 34 targets for 119 yards and no touchdowns. And according to NFL Next Gen Stats data, Green and Burrow have the lowest total expected points added of a quarterback-wide receiver tandem in the NFL. The wide receiver said that he understands the perception of the potential rift between him and Taylor, but said that's not the case. Green said that he and Taylor had a great conversation and that the coach understands the frustration and what happened on Sunday. And he says, I think that we're all frustrated about the way we're playing because we're way better than what we've been putting on tape. And for me, as in AJ Green is saying, I just have to channel that frustration and keep playing like I have for the last couple of years. Green also received public criticism after he did not make an effort to tackle Baltimore's Marcus Peters after Peters intercepted a throw intended for Green. Between that play and what was captured on the sideline, Green said that he has to do a better job of handling his frustration. I just can't let the frustration get to me. He said, I'm a leader on this team and I feel like I let my teammates down, and that's the biggest thing. I felt disappointed in myself because that's not who I am as a person or as a player. And since the Bengals drafted Green in the first round of the 2011 draft, he has been one of the league's top weapons. He's currently tied for second in receiving touchdowns in franchise history and is only 4 from breaking Chad Johnson's career mark. After not playing since 2018, Green said that he's still trying to make his way on the field and in Taylor's offense, but remains confident that he'll be able to regain his previous form. And he says he's just happy to be back out there, and he knows that it's going to come over time. So if somehow AJ Green has been dropped in your league, like technically he is in my league, maybe this might be a big motivational piece to maybe, put somebody down in your league that you don't really need anymore, so that way you can go ahead and pick him up. So let's talk about dropping people and picking them up. So I wasn't able to acquire Andy Dalton, but let's still talk about him because there's plenty of people around the league, around leagues here, that would like to know what exactly Andy Dalton can give you in a fantasy perspective from his weapons. So as we saw on Sunday, that Amari Cooper had his worst game as a player by far this year. And I don't think that is going to continue to happen. I think that when you look at Amari Cooper, you know that he is a big target. He's a guy that is good at getting receptions. He's good at route running, getting down the field, and doing what he does best. So I would argue that you should not panic yet. And if you have a wide receiver, unless it's like the fifth wide receiver on Dallas, and even then, their defense is still going to be bad. So they're still going to probably be playing from behind most times. Andy Dalton is going to have to throw the ball. Let's keep in mind again, Andy Dalton is not, Ripien. He's not, he's not somebody horrible. He's not Blake Bortles. He's not somebody. He can throw the ball. Andy Dalton can throw the football. He's just not the greatest guy, right? He's serviceable. Andy Dalton has been serviceable his whole career. He's had some good moments. He's had some bad ones. But he has experience. He knows what it's like to lead a team in an offense. There's no reason to panic thinking that Andy Dalton is going to be here and he's just like some third string guy that hasn't really seen the field in a year. Like, this guy was a starter last year and he handled it as professionally as a starter that anybody else could imagine. So to sit here, like, maybe he hasn't had the reps, and that might be the biggest thing. He hasn't had the reps, but he has a full week of reps. He's a professional. He is a pro. He knows what the NFL is about, and he's going to try and do his best. But what does this really mean for that offense? It just means Zeke is going to get more touches early on in the game. Zeke is going to get fed pretty well. So if you have Ezekiel Elliott, you're doing pretty well for yourself, I have to say. So that is a solid thing coming here. I think that if you own Zeke, that's great. I feel like you own Schultz, that's even better, because tight ends, one of the better safety nets in the NFL is a tight end that can catch the ball and help your quarterback out. And Andy Dalton can still zip the ball, right? He can still throw it. He threw it to AJ Green all those years. He can still get it done. And I wouldn't see why he would not be able to do that anyway. So I think that all in all, this is a solid move. If you got him, Andy Dalton, I think that's a serviceable replacement for Dak, because you weren't going to replace Dak's, production levels anyway. You shouldn't have looked at that transaction as this is going to replace everything Dak gave me. And maybe it does. I'm not a genie. I'm not a future sight guy. I don't know everything in the world. Something might happen that way. But what I do know is, for the most part, is that it's time to relax, right? Dallas was putting up these incredible offensive statistics because of the fact that their defense is historically bad for their franchise. The same sort of things that we see from Seattle. This is why I don't think Seattle is going to keep this up, right? Seattle can't keep up this let Russ cook stuff going, because he is going to have, don't get me wrong, he's going to have to do this, but it's not always going to lead into touchdown game-winning drives. He's done it a long time for his career, because Seattle used to be such a run-heavy team that they would stay in games, but they would not be winning them until they have a chance to take and steal a win on the last drive of the game, thus giving Russell Wilson all the reps he needed to be able to pull off comebacks and do them with comfort. So he's very comfortable being down in games and having to get game-winning drives. We've seen this. But we've seen time and time again teams that rely mostly on extreme levels of offensive output and efficiency when their defense cannot keep up and their defense can't get anybody off the field, it becomes problematic. When teams can exploit that, and we don't want that if you're a football fan, you don't want that, because in the back of your mind, you know that people get on tears all the time, but that does not mean it's going to lead to wins. Granted, fantasy-wise, I think Russell Wilson should be fine. I think he'll have a bit of regression towards the tail end, because that's just natural. But, boy, is he something special, man. He is really just unreal. He's unreal. I never would have thought Russell Wilson would continue to play to this level all these years. but he's been in conversations for MVP for a long time. They're definitely pushing the narrative for him to win MVP this year, and he's doing everything that we could have imagined Russell Wilson able to do. So that's really all you could ask for from a perspective like that. He's in a tough division, mind you. So he is in the close proximity of just walking away with the MVP. He's playing quarterback in probably the toughest division in football right now. Rams are 4-1. The Cardinals are 3-2. They are, of course, 5-0. And, if the 49ers can pull some things together, get Garoppolo, either back healthy or find some way to get Garoppolo playing better, their team is still constructed to win well, because Shanahan, I think, is one of the better coaches in the NFL. And I think he gets a lot of slack for stuff that necessarily don't always fall back on him. So, yeah, man, Russell Wilson is a strong front runner. I think Josh Allen took a little hit, but not having John Brown in that game against, the Tennessee Titans, who for all intents and accounts had X amount of days more to game plan and practice against what the Bills were doing. So, that it seems like, getting some extra rest, getting some practice and prepare for one game seems to do you well. Who would have thought that? But at the same time, not having John Brown affected that game way more than what you might have even assumed was possible, right? Because John Brown is a pretty big wide receiver threat for their offense to be able to do what it does, right? John Brown takes the top off of defenses, and it helps everybody else work underneath. It helps Cole Beasley out in the underneath in the slant routes and stuff like that. It helps their plethora of tight ends. It helps Delvin Singletary out. So not having John Brown really hurt that offense and not being as explosive as you would like it to be. And they also kept Josh Allen in check for the most part. And when you play a team like the Tennessee Titans, and if they get you down and you can't, convert first downs and you can't get to the end zone, what they're going to start doing. They're going to start hitting the choo-choo button. They're going to start handing it to Derrick Henry. And also, Derrick Henry is just so good. It's crazy to think that Derrick Henry may not be the most talented, overall running back or player in the league, but he's at this point, I think Derrick Henry's probably the top 5 most just intriguing offensive talent that we have. Like, Derrick Henry, for all intents and purposes, is the best pure runner that we've seen since Adrian Peterson come in the league. In my opinion, just a pure running, like, I'm going to run the ball and you are going to have to try to stop me. I think that he is, pound for pound, the best since Adrian Peterson that has come in the league to just do that. And he is incredible at what he does. When every team in the league knows that Derrick Henry is going to run down the outside, he's going to run in the inside, they're going to run the ball and run him until he can't run no more. And they just can't do it. You see him flinging guys, grown men, across your television screen with one hand. Like, it didn't even bother. Like, it was like a baby push. Like, yeah, of course, some guys are off balance when some of these things happen, but that's football, right? You have to be able to have enough know-how and skill to tackle Derrick Henry to not get in that position, because that is just, you're not going to tackle him anyway if you don't have the proper form trying to bring him down. So all in all, it just makes it even better. Like, he just knows that you can't stop him that way. This is an incredible player, but we're going to take our final break and we're going to come back and finish out the podcast talking about games coming up in week 6. GSMC.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, we're back, GSMC Fantasy Football Nation, and we are talking about what is to come for Week 6. What do we have on the score sheet, on the scorecards, on the bout, on the ticket? Here we go. So we have a Denver versus New England. We all know Denver's situation. It's not looking great, right? And supposedly Cam Newton is supposed to be coming back pretty soon. It said he practiced, so it looks like he's on pace to come back and play against Denver. I think that is really good. So if you've had Cam on your bench over the past few weeks, this is a strong sign that he should be playing. We have a Cleveland versus Pittsburgh matchup, which honestly might be one of the more intriguing games of the week. I think that this will be a good litmus test for Cleveland, as Cleveland is 4-1. And that, if they beat Pittsburgh, then we have to really start looking at them as a serious playoff contender and really a serious, as just how far they could actually take this run. Keep in mind, Baltimore, the Steelers, and the Cleveland Browns were 4-1 in that division. The only team with a losing record, of course, is the Cincinnati Bengals at a 1-3-1. The Baltimore Ravens do play Philadelphia, and Philadelphia is a team that, although it's very damaged, is very hurt, a lot of injuries across the board, right? I don't see them having enough to beat a Baltimore defense. However, if Philly starts to throw that ball around and really, Carson Wentz has his best sort of day that he's capable, has the talent and the capability of having, and Baltimore might have a little bit of trouble just because, Philly's defense, barring injury, they can get to the quarterback a little bit, right? They can get to the quarterback a bit. They can make some things troublesome for Lamar Jackson. And if they can get after him, they might make more of a game than what we might think. So that isn't just some cakewalk game. The Baltimore's going to have to bring their A game. The Minnesota-Atlanta game, we don't know if that is, a capable thing of happening. But I will say if it does play, Minnesota does not want to go 1-5 because at a certain point, after you lose too many games, it's just going to be way too tough, especially in a division where the Chicago Bears are 4-1. This is why getting to good starts in the NFL is so important, because we've seen data. A team that goes 0-5, I don't believe has ever made the playoffs, and a team that's 1-5, I think, is a pretty solid chance that they won't make the playoffs either. So it's a must-win for Minnesota to stay alive and potentially in the playoff hunt. The Falcons are playing their first game supposedly without their new head coach. Without their former Dan Quinn. So we'll see what just changes, if it's just an energy or just how it looks. I'm curious to see just how they come out on their first drive. I think their first drive will tell us a lot about what exactly this Falcons team really is and just what these players are, because sometimes a head coaching firing will make players, they might simplify the offense. They might just make things a bit easier, and it might just be a better work environment. But at the same time, sometimes it does the opposite. Sometimes it just, I'm not going to say it gets worse, but it's just going to be more of the same issues of crime, that are there. So then we have a Chicago versus Carolina. This would be big for Carolina to get a win here. Of course, every win is essentially big, but it wouldn't surprise me that, Chicago has a solid day. Their defense really turned it on last week against Tom Brady and the gang. They really got to him, and Khalil Mack got going for the first time this season. He looks a bit better than he did in the early weeks. So guys are starting to get their legs. Defenses are starting to get it together, and that is a good sign. But I don't believe Christian McCaffrey will be back this week, so you'll see a little bit still of the Mike Davis experience. So that is good for those who own him. Allen Robinson should still receive the workload he gets. As far as I know, Nick Foles will be the starter, and that is the end all be all, right? Hopefully, David Montgomery finds some ways to get involved in this game because aside from last week, actually not even, they still give up a lot of points to running backs in Carolina. And this would be the perfect time for David Montgomery to get a good amount of touches going his way. There's a Sunday 4:05 game on CBS, Jets versus Miami. This is only interesting to watch if LeVeon goes to Miami. I don't think the Jets get their first win against Miami. I think that Miami is an underrated team, and they've played a couple good ones here or there. And they've got some solid wins underneath their belt. I don't think they're as bad as their record shows, and they're 2-3, so it's not that horrible, right? That could be one win or one loss could have changed, and they are a positive 500 team, and that changes a lot of the narratives going on down there in Miami. Green Bay versus Tampa Bay. Tom Brady versus Aaron Rodgers, first time NFC bout. That is probably the Fox 5 game of the week, and it's going to be an intriguing one. I believe Devontae Adams will be back, so that might change the things. I don't know if Allen Lazard is still healthy, but I believe he might be. I might have to double check on that, Allen Lazard. But as we saw, Green Bay has figured out that they don't just have to throw to Devontae Adams over the past few weeks, and that is going to change how they run their offense significantly. I think Aaron Jones will still be the guy in that offense, but I think Devontae Adams is going to receive a good amount of catches, but I just don't think he's going to be getting the 15 receptions that he got week 1. That's not going to happen probably anymore for the rest of the season. I think they're going to spread the ball around. They understand that they have some offensive talent across the board, and guys can get it done. And Aaron Rodgers has been playing at an elite level like he has been known to do for most of his career. Tom Brady, brain fart against the Chicago Bears. I'm sure he's going to be out with something to prove. And when he plays against guys that he respects, he likes to show out. Now, granted, week 1, he played against Breeze, and then, it was the first 4 weeks at this point, preseason. I think now we're going to start to see what these teams really look like and where everybody is at. And I think that game is going to be really, really solid. It's going to be a great game. I also made a trade recently. I should probably mention that. I made a trade for Ronald Jones, so hopefully Ronald Jones eats at 4:25 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for me. For my purposes here, I need him to go ahead and get what he needs. The Rams play San Francisco, so a division battle, and that is going to be a big-time thing. The Rams could realistically start running away. Well, not running away, of course. They're not number one in the division, but they could get a solid, closure on the division lead because you need to get some wins against division opponents to be able to secure some spots. And this would be a big-time win for them, as it is a must-win game for San Francisco because they already lost to the Cardinals, right, in week 1. They can't take another loss to another division opponent right now while they're kind of railing. They're 2-3. They need to try and get to 500 this week. I think LA is going to try and run the ball really hard against them to tire them out because I just don't think that San Francisco has the quarterback play that is going to allow them to really move the ball against move against the Rams, right? Let's keep in mind the Rams defense has been playing really good. Aaron Donald is at an MVP level like he always has been. He's the best defensive player in the league. It's not even close. And he should be in the front running for, the MVP. Like, he should be 2 spots away from Russ. I don't know who the second one is. Probably a quarterback, but he should be 2 spots away. It's insane. The Kansas City Buffalo game that was supposed to be tonight, right? It's supposed to be the time I'm taping this is Thursday, so it's supposed to be tonight, but it was moved to Monday night. So Monday night game, which is 5 p.m. It's a 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time game. Kansas City at Buffalo, both 4-1, both coming off their first loss of the season. I'm curious to see what happens. It could be a shootout. It could be anything. Josh Allen versus another air raid monstrosity of a team. They bring their monstars of the NFL in Kansas City. It's going to be popcorn time. That's going to be great. I can't wait. As far as the last Monday night game is Arizona versus Dallas. So Arizona's defense is not that great. They weren't that great last year. They're still trying to figure out their bearings. Dallas defense is horrific. We know this. So this could be a really big Hopkins day. This could be even a really good day for Kenyan Drake to start really coming on as a player, right? So everybody's been saying Kenyan Drake has been more than just a disappointment. It's been worse than that in a lot of people's eyes, and I understand that. He has not played up, but we've seen, like last year, Kenyan Drake is able to turn it on, and he usually turns it on near the back end of the season anyway. I just think that it's been too early. It seems like he was not healthy 100% of the way through. He might be dealing with something, but last week's game was a bit promising. I don't think that he's going to be a hindrance. Now, Chase Edmonds, of course, might have a big game as well, as we've seen those two guys, or they really like Chase Edmonds in the backfield, especially in the receiving game. So that's something to look out for. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the game where Christian Kirk gets another touchdown instead of DeAndre Hopkins. Yes, I am salty. Yes, understand that touchdowns aren't always something that you should care about 100%. It should be just volume. But I digress. Dallas will be probably playing from behind, and they'll have to throw the ball. But I think Zeke will probably have a strong first half, and we'll see what happens in the third and fourth quarter. But don't hit the panic button yet if you have Dallas wide receivers or tight ends. I think that's it. The Saints are on bye. I believe Seattle is on bye. I didn't even talk about I forgot. There's some teams I just completely missed. Wow. But those are the interesting games I was really concerned with. Cincinnati does play Indianapolis. Indianapolis gets a loss last week in bad fashion. Phillip Rivers played his worst game of the year so far, and not to say that he's been playing lights out in other years prior, or last year or this year. There hasn't been that many great games. Don't sleep on Cincinnati. I keep saying this, and I will continue to say it. Cincinnati is not as bad as we think. It's just that playing their division is filled with juggernauts, and that's just how it's going to be. I think that they can probably steal some wins outside of the division, and I wouldn't like my 7-9 pick is not looking too great considering that they have a tie, but they can still probably win 5 or 6 games. Like, I think they have the talent. They're figuring some things out over there, and if AJ Green can commit and figure out this thing with Joe Burrow that he has going on, maybe we'll find a way to see him really progress into the receiver that we know he is. Jacksonville is at home. They're playing against the Detroit Lions. And, Detroit would like to have a win here. That'd be nice for them. Jacksonville, although they're 1-4, they're not as bad. They're not a bad 1-4 team in my estimation, right? They're not as bad as what we thought, right? They're not like the Jets where they're 0-5. They compete. They're a competitive team. I guess that's the best way to put it. Some teams are just bad. Some teams are competitive. Jacksonville is a competitive team. Detroit is a competitive team that has talent, and that matters. Then we have a Houston-Tennessee matchup where Houston is 1-4. We know this, and they also are a competitive team. Don't sleep on Deshaun Watson. They're starting to figure some things out. They got their first win of the season last week, and I don't believe that they don't know what Tennessee wants to do. So that's it. And we have a NFC East showdown, Washington versus New York. Pick your poison. Which one? All right. So that's your GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for this Friday. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, do what you do. Every comment helps. If you didn't like the podcast, let me know. If you did, let me know. All right. Don't forget to follow us on social media, GSMC Fantasy Football on Twitter and Facebook. I'll be back Tuesday to talk what happened on Sunday and Monday. GSMC. Peace out.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.